forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger 10. Here's Steve Dace.
And welcome to this week's episode of Bigger 10. I'm Steve Dace with my co-host and absolutely never partner, Aaron McIntyre. It's allegedly spring, but you wouldn't know it here in the state of Iowa. Pretty typical. March comes in great. April, not so much. Nevertheless, we've got April Madness in the Big Ten, and we'll be talking about that and more here momentarily. Aaron, how you doing, brother?
No, doing well. Eagerly anticipating the arrival of baby number 2. When that comes, we'll be off. We're usually on hiatus around this time of the year anyway, so whenever that comes, whenever baby number 2 comes, we'll be off for at least a couple of weeks. Yeah, I mean, the NCAA tournament, you know, for all that we build it up to be, I was thinking back a couple of weeks ago, you know, after the first weekend, man, the madness hasn't really been. Yes, it has. I mean, we had a pretty typical fare. I don't know about you. We had a pretty typical March Madness, which typical March Madness means a lot of entertaining basketball.
Yep, and it's a really compelling Final Four. I mean, if you stop and think about it, you got a little bit of everything. You have 2 number 1 seeds. One of them's the defending national champion. You have the 2 teams that have been ranked number 1 more than anybody else this year. We'll talk about one of them here in a moment. You've got 4 of the 6, and we have a Power 6 in college basketball. So you have 4 of the 6 major conferences represented. We have a proud athletic department making a Final Four for the first time. We've got another Cinderella run from NC State. So it's a Cinderella this year, and it's almost exactly 40 years since they did this exact thing that they're trying to do right now under Jim Valvano. So it's a pretty compelling Final Four. In fact, let's start there with the one team that we didn't specifically mention, because as we get started with our Big 5 here on Bigger 10, maybe the most inexplicable drought in college sports is over. How many times have I mentioned this here on Bigger 10 the last few years?
Every year.
It's just beyond crazy to me, given how great Purdue basketball has been for the last 40 years. I mean, the Gene Cady years, Matt Painter's been outstanding. They have more Big Ten championships than anybody else. Yet Purdue has not been to a Final Four since Joe barely cared back when Jimmy Carter was still president in 1980. Well, that drought is now over. And Purdue trying to do something that Virginia did back in 2019, lose as a 16 and then come back, or lose to a 16 and then come back the next year and win it all. And a lot of it has to do with this guy right here. I mean, Zach Edey is this generation's Ralph Sampson. Ralph Sampson's the only player to be consensus National Player of the Year twice, and Zach Edey is going to be the second. His game is very similar. They're, of course, similar size, height. The first Big Ten men's basketball player to post a 40-point plus and a 15-plus rebound game in an NCAA tournament game, let alone in the Elite Eight. No one's ever done that. Think Glenn Rice is the all-time single NCAA tournament leading scorer at Michigan. Never did this. Think about Isaiah Thomas leading Indiana to a national championship. Never did this. Magic Johnson never did this. I mean, this league's got some basketball tradition, and guys never did what Zach Edey did. He's the first Division I player to post those numbers in an Elite Eight ever in the history of the tournament. So that means Christian Laettner, nope. Ralph Sampson, nope. Michael Jordan, nope. I mean, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, nope. Lou Alcindor, Bill Walton, nope. This is some rarefied air. And I don't know if you saw the emotion. Robbie Hummel, another great all-time player at Purdue, was calling the game on NCAA tournament radio in the regional final, and he just broke down and sobbed because, I mean, this whole program has carried this burden despite its excellence, this albatross. And you think of that famous clip, Aaron, of Steve Young when he finally won a Super Bowl. He looks at Jerry Rice and he says, "Hey, take the monkey off my back," right? Well, the monkey is finally off Purdue's back. They're back in the Final Four. Your thoughts?
What an amazing story this has been, and just my favorite moment maybe from this, just as an outside observer, not a Purdue fan, is the video of Zach Edey not even getting up on the ladder to cut down some of the nets and then going and handing a piece of the net over to Gene Cady. That's just an amazing story right there. And here's some unsolicited advice. Some advice that Purdue fans didn't ask for, but I'm going to give them anyway. And this is coming from a Kansas City Chiefs fan. I don't know if you're on Twitter much, if you're a Purdue fan. I've seen this ad nauseum. Is there any truth to it? I don't really care, because you just don't put up the numbers that Zach Edey has and Purdue has through Zach Edey without there being some form of greatness there. I mean, his numbers hanging from the rafters. We talked about that a few weeks ago. Take it from a Kansas City Chiefs fan. We are the villains of the NFL right now. Just tune all that out and just enjoy it, okay? Just enjoy it. Don't even entertain what I've seen a lot of, which is, I can't believe Zach Edey takes so many free throws. Oh, the officiating is slanted. Just tune all of that out and enjoy this, because as you just pointed out, Steve, it's been a long time, decades in the making, for them to get back to the Final Four. So just enjoy the ride. Doesn't really, all of that outside noise, that's always going to be there. But you're back where Purdue basketball should be. And you should be thankful for that, not only thankful for that, but just enjoy this moment. Because as low as last year was, this has the opportunity to be the highest of highs, given the circumstances and given what probably you're going to be going up against in a buzzsaw in UConn. I think this has one of the opportunities. Maybe Purdue fans will be looking back at it and saying, hey, that was worth it. 40 years in the desert was kind of worth it.
Let's talk about their draw now from here. They're taking on Cinderella NC State, and I mentioned the 83 team under Jim Valvano needed to win the ACC tournament just to make the NCAA tournament back in 1983. We were, I think, a 52-team tournament back then. It was not 64 teams yet. They did that and then ended up winning out, including beating number 1 Houston with Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler. Can you imagine those two guys on the same college team, by the way? And they beat those guys at the Pit in Albuquerque, one of the great upsets in NCAA tournament history, to win it all. This team trying to do the exact same thing. NC State hasn't been to the Final Four since then. They only got in because they won 5 games in 5 days, first time that's ever been done in the ACC tournament. And now they've won 4 in a row here. They have their own big fella. Now, he's not as tall as Zach Edey, but he is, as Al McGuire used to say, he's a space eater. They've got a little bit of everything on that team. There's some thought that maybe because of their big fella, they won't have to double Edey and give up so many open threes. But you have to think Purdue is a solid favorite over an 11 seed, as great of a run as it's been for the Wolfpack. And then awaiting them, you've got either Alabama, which maybe shoots as many threes as anybody in the country, against UConn, which has just been, in the last couple of months, an absolute machine. We saw them up close and personal in the Big Ten in the Elite Eight. Guys, I've never seen a 30-0 run in a major college basketball game in my life, and I've watched a lot of games, let alone at this level. And hey, I don't think anybody would have been shocked if UConn put up a bunch of points against Illinois, Aaron. I mean, defense was kind of optional for Illinois much of this year, but they've got a ton of offensive weapons on that team, including Terrence Shannon, who's maybe been the best non-Zach Edey player in college basketball for the last 2 months. It's not even that they put up, 30 points on him in 10 minutes. It's that they didn't give up any. Illinois got absolutely nothing in one of the most dominant stretches we've ever seen in an NCAA tournament game. I know that's the Monday night game everybody wants to see. And as I said earlier, they're the 2 teams that have been ranked number 1 this season more than anybody else. So what do you think of Purdue's draw?
So just going back to who they're playing in the Final Four in NC State, I've been counting them out basically every round, and they keep proving me wrong over and over again. I mean, you're talking about a team, you set this up pretty nicely, but you're talking about a team, we were talking about off the air, who needed an 86%, I think, free throw shooter in Virginia in the first round of the ACC tournament. Yeah. I don't think this guy had actually missed 2 free throws in a game all season. He did that for the first time with like 5 seconds left. NC State goes down. They score the game-tying three-pointer, go on to win that game. 5 games in 5 days. I'm thinking there's no way in heck that they're going to be able to survive more than 1 round in the NCAA tournament, but they didn't. And so that gives me pause. A little bit of pause, because I've bet against them, not literally, but just in my mind, bet against them basically every round of this tournament, and they've proven me wrong every single time. You do have to think, though, despite there being that big boy inside, there's still a height advantage there, so I'm not totally sure about that. I think the better matchup I think the better matchup, or worse matchup, I should say, for Purdue is going to be in the national championship game if they meet UConn, because UConn has a big as well who can really size up against Zach Edey. So that's going to be a really tough game, really tough matchup. But again, given the circumstances, this has the opportunity. If you're looking at this, if you're looking at your road, Purdue, and you're saying, boy, we've still got some tall hills to climb here. That's what's going to make this run legendary if indeed you can see it all the way through. So it's going to be tough. It's going to remain to be. It's the NCAA tournament. They haven't really had they've had an okay draw to this point, but no game has been necessarily a layup. And just kind of in the same vein, though not as maybe dramatic as UConn, they've been handling their business well. So these last 2 games, though, are going to be the toughest of them all, in my opinion.
Well, let's switch over to the women's side, because we have a women's team going to the Final Four as well. It's Iowa, specifically Caitlin Clark again. A tremendous run through the regional. Iowa was given the toughest draw of all the number 1 seeds on Selection Sunday, and yet they've made it through to the end again. A rematch from last year's national championship game against Angel Reese and LSU. Iowa controls the game down the stretch. Caitlin Clark was just amazing in the game.
She accounted for 67 of their, I think, 94 points. That's stupid.
What do you even say to that? I mean, that's paced on double dribble back in the day on NES kind of stuff. That's just nuts. I created myself on NBA Live and gave myself 100 on everything on the easiest mode. Yeah, I mean, it's just nuts, but it's real life. Iowa now, you want to talk about tough draws. So, I mean, first of all, you got to look at Caitlin Clark and what she's done. 40 points and 10 assists. The amount of NCAA tournament games that have included a player doing this since they started keeping track of assists as an official stat in the mid-'80s. Caitlin Clark has done it twice. No one else has done it ever in the men's and women's NCAA basketball tournament in 40 years.
Just one of one.
Yeah. That's a crazy stat. That might even be crazier than the Zach Edey stat, frankly. And so Iowa, though, has a tough draw. So you take on the defending national champions. It's either they didn't want Iowa in this thing or they're milking Caitlin Clark for all the TV ratings they can get, okay? So you have to take on the defending national champions. Next, you take on the greatest program in the history of women's basketball, Gina Auriemma's UConn team. And then if you get past those two and they made it past the first step, awaiting you, the unquestioned number 1 undefeated team in women's college basketball, more than likely anyway, in South Carolina. This would be, if Iowa pulls this off, Aaron, this could be one of maybe the greatest March in the history of the women's basketball tournament.
Yeah, I thought I left them for dead after their West Virginia game where they really struggled, and credit to them, they won in a style of play that they really don't want to play in. But again, this is really the Iowa Caitlin Clarks here. You know, if she was just a great scorer, if she was just the great scorer that she is, she still might go down as one of the best, if not the best, women's college basketball player in history. But what makes Iowa as a team so dangerous and why they've made 2 runs now in a row to the Final Four is the fact that she's not just a one-dimensional player. I'm not necessarily talking about defense. She's decent at defense most of the time, but it's her passing. That makes the rest of the team incredibly dangerous. And my favorite, I know Kate Martin has kind of been her sidekick for her throughout her career, and she had a great game the other night, over 20 points. I think it was close to 30 points if I'm not mistaken. But man, my favorite player to watch, the tallest short girl, and short in terms of basketball short, Gabby Marshall. She hits threes like none other. And I don't know, in the postseason now, both in the Big Ten tournament and now through 3-4 games in the NCAA tournament, 4 games through the NCAA tournament, the number of times I've seen this 5'9", which means she's probably 5'7" or 5'8" girl, go out there and either reject balls or just intercept balls, get taller than she looks on the court. She's one of my favorite players to watch, but really what makes this entire team dangerous, why they've made these 2 runs, is Caitlin Clark's passing. It makes the rest of the team a lot more dangerous than maybe they would be just given and left to their own. So, again, I'm not counting them out from this time henceforth. Maybe I should. It seems like my jinx is maybe valuable for something there, but just a phenomenal run. Just a fun group of gals to watch play. They surely enjoy. They look like they enjoy playing with one another. They look like they enjoy playing the sport, and that's a lot of fun as a viewer to watch.
All right, let's talk about the road ahead now. Comparing, we talked about their individual roads. Let's compare between Purdue and Iowa. Their other conferences have done it. The Big East has done it, thankfully because of UConn in their case. The ACC has done it in the past. But the Big Ten has never had a year where it won both the men's and women's NCAA tournaments in the same season. So who do you think's got the better chance? Purdue up against Cinderella NC State, and then likely number 1 overall seed UConn and the defending national champs, who they're the one team that has a Zach Edey style big man to match up with him, and they're more athletic on the wing, so that's a tough matchup, as you pointed out. Or Iowa, who already had to beat the defending national champions, but now has to go up against, as I just said, the best program in the history of the sport, and then likely one of the best teams in the history of the sport if they win that game.
You know, parenthetically, this is kind of an interesting factoid here. I wonder how many times it's happened that a singular school had a team, both in the men's and women's side, make it to the Final Four in the same season. I wonder how many times, if ever, 2 schools have actually had both their men's and women's teams make it to the same Final Four in the same year, because that's happening with UConn and NC State this year. I don't know if that's ever happened. So
forgot all about NC State Cinderella run in the women's tournament too. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's ever happened. The irony here is that Iowa might have the same but inverted path. They might have to beat UConn and NC State, and similarly, Purdue has to beat NC State and probably UConn to win the title. I don't know. I've seen Iowa. I've seen them beat South Carolina. Okay, I've seen them beat South Carolina, which is probably who they'll face in the national final. Okay, I've not seen Purdue beat UConn. I'm gonna give the edge to Iowa. Now, I haven't seen Iowa beat UConn either necessarily, not in recent memory. So there's that too. But I think Iowa has the stronger overall team right now than UConn does, though they're in the Final Four, so I'm not taking anything away from them. But I'm just going to go with, you're talking about Zach Edey, who is a historical player for Purdue. And then you're talking about Caitlin Clark, who is a generational talent for the sport of women's college basketball. So I'm going to give the edge to my Hawkeyes. Hopefully I'm not ruining all that then.
All right, let's talk coaching news in the Big Ten. One of the proud programs in the Big Ten that had arguably its worst season in program history, finished last in the league for the first time since 1959, and finished 14th overall, and then lost pretty handily to Penn State in the Big Ten tournament. Fired the coach, Juwan Howard. Michigan hiring kind of the it candidate this cycle, Dusty May, who frankly would have been the Ohio State basketball coach more than likely if Jake Diebler, the interim coach, had not gone on a run towards the end of the year. There's a lot of talk that they were kind of unofficially back-channeled well down the road, and then Diebler got on a run, and Ohio State decided to stick with him. He spurned Louisville. A lot of people were surprised at this, to go ahead and go to Michigan, given the amount of money that Louisville spends on basketball compared to Michigan. What do you think of the hire overall?
Overall, and we'll get into this a little bit more in Would You Rather. Overall, I like the hire. Credit to Michigan, as you pointed out on Michigan Podcast last week. This was a fairly clean process in terms of hiring. No leaks, no trial balloons like I think sometimes happens, especially in major and high-profile blue blood, at least blue blood resource level of schools. No trial balloons out there. Your athletic director, Ward Manuel, just went out. He found his guy, identified his guy, went out and got him. That's the end of the story. Let's start building from here. So I like that for Michigan. That's kind of what you need right now because it got messy. It got real messy this year. Quite frankly, it got real messy the last few years with Juwan Howard. It's just this year there was the sympathetic factor of, obviously, sadly, the heart issue that he was dealing with. But it's gotten real messy at Michigan. So I think you did the best I think you did the best you could. I mean, with these guys, with the it coaches, either it's going to be a boom or a bust, okay? I don't care if it was Dusty. I don't have a particular animosity towards Dusty May versus fill in the blank it coach this year. It's either going to work or it's not going to work. So you want to get the it coach. You don't want to get the, let's take a flyer on this guy who's not really a known commodity. So I think you did as best as you could hope for.
Well, while we're talking about some interplay between Michigan and Ohio State, a little football news to close us out here. You remember, maybe you don't, but when Ohio State really was just putting it on Michigan under Urban Meyer, towards the end of that era, Urban hired 2 members of Michigan's staff away. And it was kind of viewed as, under Jim Harbaugh, kind of viewed as symbolic of where things stood, right? Well, Michigan just flipped the table and flipped the script on Ohio State, hiring away longtime running backs coach Tony Alford, who was brought to Ohio State by Urban Meyer, and he'd already been taking part in spring practice. Like, he had been out on the field as Ohio State's running backs coach while he was waiting for Michigan to finish its background check and negotiate the contract. So, I mean, we had the whole thing with Michigan and in-person scouting last year. So he was out on the field with the new offensive coordinator, Chip Kelly, and doing the install of the offense, learning the scheme. All right, gets out there for the first few spring practices. Paperwork gets done. Pours one out. Heads out to Michigan as the running backs coach there. Left behind, maybe. Some people are saying this might be the best running back room of all time. Trevion Henderson, Quinshawn Junkins came in from Ole Miss. He leaves that behind to take over at Michigan. I don't know how big of a deal it is. In another life, I knew Tony Alford very well at Iowa State. Great guy. You know, it's a position coach, but it's that's why it's last on the list. But it is because of the interplay between these schools and the current state of the rivalry. It's kind of a tongue wagging kind of a story, if you know what I'm saying, right? Salacious a little bit.
I mean, did the hiring away of Michigan coaches from Michigan towards Urban Meyer, was that ultimately what changed the culture at Michigan? No. So
but rest assured, we melted down about it. Nevertheless, of course,
good for you.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Good for you. See, yeah. I don't have these problems as an Iowa fan. I just don't. Okay. Instead, the problems that I have is Alabama, luring away a recruit 2 times now. These
something.
are the problems that I have.
That's another thing where a player now takes the money and then leaves.
Yeah.
And never plays, even though he took some of the money.
So, Things are going great.
All right, let's get to some Would You Rather when we return. All right, Aaron, time for some Would You Rather. I will start with one for you, my friend. Would you rather be Dusty May or Jake Diebler, the new basketball coaches at Michigan and Ohio State, respectively? Which one of those two guys would you rather be now or in the foreseeable future?
I think I would rather be Dusty May right now. With Jake Diebler, immediately there's going to be expectations there. Immediately. Hey, I expect this team to perform the way they did down the stretch last season. That's going to be the expectation, okay? When it comes to Dusty May, you're starting from scratch. You're building something new, okay? Now, I understand that a few of his players may be following from him from FAU. Good deal. But you're still, as a program, you are kind of starting from scratch. So there are some expectations. That's just the nature of the job at a high major school like Michigan. There are some expectations. But I don't think they're the way they are at Ohio State. At Ohio State, you are not. You've still got some stragglers. You're still going to be expected to make those dry bones walk again. So I just don't want those expectations. If I'm starting my tenure as a new head coach somewhere, I don't want any expectations, or I don't want unduly high expectations as I'm trying to build my own program. So I think Dusty May has an advantage there. This one's for you. Would you rather be Tim Lester or Chip Kelly right now? One coach in Chip Kelly has very high expectations. Another coach, Tim Lester at Iowa, has no expectations.
I'd rather be Chip Kelly.
Yeah, me too.
You've already been in the NFL. You've been in the BCS national championship game. You had a perennial top 5-10 program at Oregon. You're used to the pressure. If anything, you're under less pressure because you're not head coaching the team. The pressure's on Ryan Day. And that's why you left UCLA, is so that you wouldn't be under the microscope and could just coach ball and not deal with NIL and all the other stuff that we're talking about all the time. So I think Chip Kelly's also got a much more secure resume than Tim Lester does. If it doesn't go well, right, I'd much rather be Chip Kelly because he is walking into that running back room that we just talked about. And one thing we know about Chip Kelly, he likes running the football. For you, Aaron, would you rather be Caitlin Clark trying to politically survive in the WNBA or Zach Edey trying to even find a position in the NBA? Moving forward, which of those two all-time great stars would you rather be?
Caitlin Clark, because I think her giftedness is closer to being able to even transcend the political peccadillos of the WNBA than Zach Edey's gifts are of being able to transcend today's style of NBA basketball. I don't think I can really give much more information than that.
There you go.
Now, I wouldn't want I wouldn't want to be necessarily either of them right now, but I think her gift and skill set is closer to being able to overcome what you just laid out there. Would you rather bet Ohio State, finally for you, or Michigan next year in men's basketball to win the Big Ten?
I think I'd rather bet Michigan, even though I think Ohio State is absolutely the favorite and should be, just because I'm going to get a lot better odds. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, so you didn't ask me what I'd rather pick, but what would I rather bet, you know? And so you go back a few years ago when I picked Michigan, when I bet Michigan, I think it was 10 or 12 to 1 to win the Big Ten in 21. You know, going into that year, I thought Jim Harbaugh was canned. I mean, I thought we were going to go 7-5. You know that. I even said that here on the channel. But why? So why did I bet Michigan 10 to 1 to win the Big Ten? Well, because you're still giving me at worst the third most talented roster in the league. So if you're giving me 10 to 1 odds, it's just good value. I'm going to bet it. How good was that value? Well, I took my family to Universal Studios, Aaron, after we won the Big Ten that year. So it was really good value. Okay,
right.
You know, and so I think Ohio State is where Michigan was last year, where everybody said no to the draft and they brought the band back together, with one exception. They don't have a J.J. McCarthy coming back at quarterback. You know, we'll see how good Will Howard is. I think he's okay. Jag plus, you know. But in terms of the defense, the running game, they've got everything else Michigan had. They've got a sense of mission. So they clearly are the favorite in the league, in my view.
Are you talking football?
Football, yeah.
I meant basketball.
Oh, you meant basketball?
Yeah.
Oh, my bad.
I think I said basketball.
Did you?
Maybe I should have emphasized that.
You know what? I'm going to bet Michigan again. You know why? Because, again, I think I'll get a better value. And I think Michigan may get all three of these Florida Atlantic guys. And if they do, I mean, you're potentially talking about both the best point guard and the best big man in the Big Ten next year. If you look at the guys that are going to be gone, Terrence Shannon gone. You've already got the Coleman kid. Is that who I'm thinking of?
Coleman Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you. He's already said he's gone. Zach Edey's obviously already said he's gone. So I would bet Michigan. There's a
void there. Yeah.
What's that?
There's a void.
Yeah. So if you get the Florida Atlantic kids, Michigan's going to have one of the best starting fives in the Big Ten next year. So I'll pick them. Because I also think that number's probably like 25 to 1, where at Ohio State it might be 10 to 1, which is still a good value, by the way. Okay? We'll come back, wrap it up with our Twitter poll results and more next. All right, this week's Twitter poll results. Who is the greater all-time Big Ten basketball player? 87% voted for Caitlin Clark. 13% voted for Zach Edey. A lot of feedback that this wasn't even a fair question. But that brings us to the feedback of the week, and then I'll bring you in on this, Aaron. Tyler Brown says Caitlin Clark is the greatest Big Ten women's basketball player, but to be the greatest player, she would have had to play on the men's team. So your thought about the question and the feedback, is it even a fair debate to have at all?
Well, we're not talking about athletes. We're talking about players.
Yeah.
That's the question that you asked. Now, if you were to say greatest Big Ten athlete and open it up to every single sport, obviously, you know, the biological, it's probably going to be a man. Okay. Now, you're talking about player, though, and we're not talking about necessarily, we're not saying that stupid account. I can't even remember what it was. Hear me out here. Well, give me one good reason why Caitlin Clark couldn't play in the NBA. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about players. And so I took it as in the silo, given what they mean to their own respective sport. That's what I'm talking about.
That's how I meant it. Yeah.
And so that's how I took it. And to me, it's obvious it's Caitlin Clark. Taking nothing away from Zach Edey. He's a great college basketball player, an all-time Purdue great, but he's not in the same stratosphere as Caitlin Clark. So that's the way I took the question. I wasn't talking about I'm not talking about we're all in one big silo here. I'm just talking about who means the most to their respective sport.
You know, I think people put more thought into it than me. I just thought I need a good question. Both of these players are going to be consensus back-to-back national players of the year. In the Elite Eight, they both had 40 40-point double-doubles in their respective categories. I wasn't thinking any more beyond just those two things when I picked the question. All right, but hey, it was a fun debate nevertheless. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, follow. If you're watching right here on YouTube or listening on iTunes and elsewhere, it would be great if you did those things. They help us to find via the algorithmic gods we all must now bow to these days would help us to find more Big Ten sports fans just like you. You can keep up with what we think on all things Big Ten and more by following us on X or Twitter at Bigger10 there. Again, that's at Bigger10 there. A preemptive congratulations to Aaron on the pending arrival of he and Bella's number 2. We're all very excited about that, which kind of puts up in the air. We're getting close to the end of the season anyway. We would typically do an end of spring football wrap-up episode for MP and then one for Bigger 10 as well. We'll still do those, but they'll be up in the air depending on when Aaron's paternity leave needs to occur, so stay tuned for that. Nevertheless, keep it tuned right here in between episodes for all things Big Ten. And for Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you then.